Hello and welcome to Macabre Histories. The tale we are about to unfold is one of deep isolation, of family ties twisted into something unrecognizable, and of a secret buried deep in the fog-shrouded hollows of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The year is 1892, and some places have been forgotten by time, allowing darkness to fester. Before we journey into that cold, damp cabin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell. We unearth these lost stories for you, and your support ensures we can keep digging. Now, settle in and let us begin. Silas Vane was a man of logic, a man of letters. He'd come south from Richmond with a satchel full of notebooks and a head full of theories. His purpose was academic, or so he told his patrons. He was a folklorist, obsessed with the lingering whispers of the lost colony of Roanoke. While others searched for artifacts, Silas searched for stories. Believing the displaced settlers had mingled with the native tribes and pressed inland, their unique dialect and superstitions surviving in the isolated pockets of the Appalachian wilderness. He was, by every measure, a city man. His wool suit, though durable, was hopelessly inadequate for the terrain. His boots, polished just 3 days prior, were now caked in a thick red clay unique to the region. He'd been warned in the last settlement, a place called Windy Gap, that the mountains didn't suffer fools, especially not in late October. That fog ain't mist, son, an old-timer with a corncob pipe had warned him. That's the mountain's breath. It swallows maps. Silas had dismissed it as local color. Now he was paying the price. The fog had rolled in not as a gentle blanket, but as an ambush. It poured over the ridges like thick, sour milk, erasing the narrow deer trail he'd been following. The temperature plummeted. The vibrant autumn reds and yellows dissolved into a monochrome gray. He checked his compass, but the needle's spin seemed frantic, unreliable. He was hopelessly lost. The sun, which had been a weak copper coin in the sky, was now just a memory. Dusk was approaching with alarming speed. A cold, penetrating drizzle began to fall, turning the clay beneath his feet into a treacherous slurry. He slipped, catching himself on the rough bark of a poplar, tearing his glove and scraping his palm. A sharp sting of pain, followed by the sticky warmth of his own blood, sent the first true spike of panic through his academic calm. He was trespassing. This land was not welcoming. Every snapped twig sounded like a footfall, every gust of wind like a low, warning growl. He was cold, wet, and bleeding. He had provisions for a day hike, not an overnight ordeal. Then the storm truly broke. It was not a gentle rain, it was a deluge. The wind shrieked, tearing dead leaves from their branches. Thunder cracked overhead, not a distant rumble, but a violent, splitting sound that seemed to shake the very granite of the mountains. Silas abandoned his pretense of navigation and did the only thing he could. He moved downhill, praying he would find a stream, a road, or any sign of civilization. He stumbled for what felt like hours, his heavy, waterlogged coat feeling like a suit of armor. His foot caught on a root, and he tumbled down a short, steep embankment, landing hard in a heap of mud and sodden leaves. He lay there for a moment, the breath knocked from him, the icy rain plastering his hair to his skull. It was in that moment of utter despair, lying face down in the mire, that he smelled it. It was not the clean, loamy scent of the forest floor. It was the acrid, unmistakable smell of wood smoke. He scrambled to his feet, hope surging through him. He pushed through a curtain of dripping hemlock branches and saw it. Perhaps 50 yards distant, nestled in a deep, shadowed cleft of the land, a hollow within the hollow. It was a cabin. It was a dark, sagging structure, looking more like a part of the earth than something built upon it. A single point of dim yellow light glowed in one tiny window, a feeble beacon against the crushing dark. And from the crooked stone chimney, a thin, grey plume of smoke rose, only to be beaten back down by the relentless rain. It was shelter. It was salvation. Silas Vane, folklorist and man of logic, pushed aside the primal warning screaming in the back of his mind and stumbled toward the light. The closer he got, the more his initial relief curdled into unease. The cabin was in a state of profound neglect. The roof was a patchwork of moss-covered shingles and rusted tin. The porch sagged heavily to one side, its floorboards warped and broken. Barrels, overflowing with stagnant rainwater, listed near the steps. There was no garden, no tended path, only the raw, muddy earth, scarred by heavy boot prints. The air in the hollow was thick and still, the wind seeming to howl above them, as if this depression in the land was beneath its notice. The smell of wood smoke was layered with something else, something rank and unsettling, a mixture of spoiled food, wet fur, and something metallic, like old blood. Silas hesitated on what passed for the path. This was not the welcoming homestead of a mountain family. This was a lair. As he watched, the cabin door, a heavy plank of unfinished wood, scraped open. A figure emerged, silhouetted against the dim light within. It was a man, but only just. He was immensely broad, but stooped, moving with a clumsy, shuffling gait. He wore overalls that were stiff with grime and carried a sloshing bucket in one hand. The man or creature dumped the contents of the bucket over the side of the porch. A foul stench hit Silas, even at this distance. The man then stood still, his head tilted, as if listening to the storm. He was large, but his movements were oddly childlike. Silas knew he should call out, announce himself, but his voice was frozen in his throat. The figure turned its head, a slow, deliberate motion. Even in the gloom, Silas could see the face was wrong. The features were heavy, asymmetrical, the brow low and thick. "Who's there?" The voice was not a shout, but a thick, wet rumble, like stones grinding together. "I see the skulkin' in the trees." Silas had no choice. He stepped out from the cover of the hemlocks, raising his hands slowly. "Forgive me, I'm lost. The storm. I am a traveler from Richmond. My name is Silas Vane." The large man stared. He did not lower his head or move his body. Only his eyes swiveled in their sockets to track Silas. He seemed to be processing the words, turning them over like unfamiliar objects. "Richmond," the man repeated. The word sounded alien in his mouth. "That's far." "Yes, quite far. I am a folklorist. I was studying the old trails and the storm caught me. I mean no harm. I only seek shelter for the night. I can pay." Silas fumbled for his wallet, an absurd gesture in the driving rain. The man grunted. "Jeb's the one for paying. I'm Malachi." As if summoned, a new voice cut through the rain from inside the cabin. It was sharper, higher, and held a brittle authority. "Malachi, who's you gabbing at? Get the wood. It's a man, Jeb," Malachi called back, his voice rising in strange excitement. A city man, lost. The door scraped fully open. The man who stood there was the opposite of Malachi. He was tall and painfully thin, a whipcord of a man. He held a flickering kerosene lantern, illuminating a face that was just as unsettling as his brother's, but for different reasons. Where Malachi was simple and broad, this one Gabe was sharp and cunning. His eyes, set too closely together, glittered with a shrewd intelligence. They shared the same watery, pale blue color, the same thin, colorless lips. Jebediah studied Silas from head to toe. His gaze lingered on Silas's leather satchel and his city boots. "Lost, you say?" Jebediah's voice was a nasal whine. "Folks tend to stay lost up here. This ain't Richmond. This is our land. Black Rock Hollow." "Please," Silas said, shivering violently now, his teeth chattering. "I won't be any trouble. Just a fire and a dry floor until the storm passes. I have silver." Jebediah stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. The rain hammered down. Malachi looked at Jeb, then at Silas, a strange, eager grin splitting his heavy face. "He's wet, Jeb, awful wet." Jebediah's thin lips peeled back in what might have been a smile. It did not touch his eyes. "He is that. Well, we ain't savages. Can't let a man perish in the night. Get in," he snapped, turning his back. "But you mind your ways, city man. You'll touch nothing. And you'll keep your eyes where they belong. We got family business." Silas Vane, his heart pounding a rhythm of fear and relief, climbed the sagging steps and crossed the threshold, leaving the relative sanity of the storm for the oppressive, suffocating darkness of the cabin. The inside of the cabin was a single large room, plunged into a gloom that the single lantern and the meager fire did little to dispel. The air was suffocating. It was the smell Silas had caught outside, magnified 100 times, the stench of unwashed bodies, rancid fat, wood smoke, and beneath it all, the pervasive, sickly sweet odor of decay. The floor was packed, earth, uneven and cold. In one corner 2 filthy cots were piled with greasy pelts and rags. A crude plank table sat in the center, dominated by the remains of a meal gnawed bones and congealed gravy on pewter plates. Flies, sluggish in the cold, crawled over the scraps. The walls were chinked with mud and straw, and from the rafters hung dried herbs. Bundles of twisted roots and several skinned animals Silas couldn't immediately identify. Jebediah placed the lantern on the table. The light cast huge, dancing shadows that made the small room feel like a cave inhabited by giants. "Sit," Jeb commanded, gesturing to a 3-legged stool near the hearth. "Malachi, get him a rag. He's dripping on the floor." Silas huddled by the fire, a pathetic, smoldering thing that gave off more smoke than heat. Malachi shoved a piece of burlap at him, so stiff with filth it was practically useless, and Silas did his best to dry his face and hands. The brothers watched him. Malachi watched with a wide-eyed, unnerving curiosity, his mouth slightly open. Jeb watched with a predator's stillness, his close-set eyes missing nothing. "A folklorist," Jeb said, tasting the word. "That mean you write lies, put 'em in books?" "No, not at all," Silas said quickly, trying to find a non-threatening tone. "I collect stories, legends, songs, remedies, the history of the mountain people. To preserve it." "Preserve," Jeb repeated. He picked up a long, sharp skinning knife from the table and began to clean his fingernails with the tip. "We know about preserving. Ain't that right, Malachi?" "That's right, Jeb," Malachi agreed enthusiastically. "We preserve the blood," Grandpappy said. "The blood is the line." Silas nodded, pretending to understand. "A strong family legacy. Admirable." "It ain't admirable. It's fact," Jeb snapped. "This hollow is ours. Grandpappy built this cabin with his own 2 hands. Cut the trees, dug the stone. Said this place was clean. Said we had to keep it clean. Don't need no city men bringing their filth up here. Don't need their weak blood." Silas fell silent. The atmosphere was charged, brittle. He was an intruder in a world with rules he could not possibly comprehend. He ate the food they offered, a bowl of thin, greasy squirrel stew, with feigned gratitude. It tasted of rotten pepper, but it was hot. "Where you heading?" Jeb asked, his eyes fixed on Silas's satchel. "When the storm breaks, back to Windy Gap," Silas lied, "then back to Richmond. My work here is ... finished, is it?" Jeb's smile was a flicker of malice. "Maybe it's just begun. Ain't many folk find Black Rock Hollow. Most that do, they don't find their way back out." Malachi giggled, a high-pitched, childish sound that was horrible coming from his massive frame. "They get lost. The fog gets That's right, Malachi. The fog," Jeb said, his eyes still locked on Silas. "You eat up, Mr. Vane. You'll need your strength. The storm sounds fixing to last a good while." Silas looked at the single, grimy window. The rain was lashing against it in solid sheets. The world outside had vanished, replaced by a roaring, watery chaos. He was trapped. He was at the mercy of these two strange, unsettling men who spoke of clean blood and preserving the line while living in absolute squalor. He finished the stew, his stomach churning, and thanked them. "You can sleep there," Jeb said, pointing not to the floor, but to a third cot in the darkest corner of the room, near a large, rough-hewn trapdoor set into the floor. "Don't get no ideas about that satchel. Malachi is a light sleeper. And he don't like thieves." "I'm grateful," Silas murmured, moving to the cot. It smelled overpoweringly of sweat and animals. He lay down without removing his damp clothes, pulling a stiff, rancid pelt over himself. He was exhausted, but sleep felt impossible. The brothers spoke in low, wet murmurs, arguing about something. Silas couldn't make out the words. He just watched the firelight flicker on their strange, similar faces. Eventually, Jeb blew out the lantern, plunging the room into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the dying red embers in the hearth. Silas closed his eyes, feigning sleep, his mind racing. He heard the brothers settle into their cots. He heard the wind and the rain. And then, beneath the sounds of the storm, he heard something else, something from below his cot, something from beneath the trapdoor. It was a sound so faint he thought he'd imagined it. A rhythmic scrape, ... clink. A pause. Scrape, ... clink. It was the sound of a chain being dragged, slowly, across a hard-packed earth floor. Silas's blood turned to ice. He lay perfectly still, his body rigid, every sense straining in the darkness. The cabin was filled with the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the sleeping brothers, the howl of the wind, and the relentless drumming of the rain. But the other sound, it was still there. Scrape, ... clink. It was coming directly from the trapdoor to the root cellar, just inches from his cot. It was not the random sound of a settling house or a scurrying animal. It was methodical, deliberate. The scrape was heavy, like metal on stone. The clink was the unmistakable sound of a heavy-gauge chain link striking another. He held his breath, listening. The sound was followed by a low, guttural moan. It was not the wind, it was a human sound, a sound of profound, animalistic misery. Silas's mind, the logical, academic mind, fought for an explanation. A trapped animal? A hog, perhaps? But the sound was too rhythmic, the moan too resonant with despair. He had a sudden, horrifying vision, a large, chained dog, forgotten in the cellar. But that didn't feel right either. The brothers did not seem the type to keep pets. They seemed the type to use things. Scrape, ... clink. The sound continued, a terrible metronomic clock ticking off the seconds of Silas's confinement. He was lying mere feet above a creature, a person. in chains. His terror was so profound it was paralyzing. He wanted to leap from the cot, to bolt for the door and take his chances with the storm. But he knew, with chilling certainty, that he wouldn't make it 5 steps. Jeb had called Malachi a light sleeper, and Silas believed him. The brothers were creatures of this hollow. He was a city man, clumsy and loud. He forced his breathing to remain deep and even, mimicking sleep. He slowly, carefully, opened his eyes, letting them adjust to the near blackness. The embers in the hearth provided just enough light to see the vague, hulking shapes of the brothers on their cots. They were still. The sound from below stopped. Silas waited. The silence that followed was somehow worse, filled with a dreadful anticipation. Had he been heard? Did the thing below know he was there? After a long minute, the moaning began again. It was different this time. Not just misery, but a low, throaty keening. It was a sound of primal hunger or unbearable grief. It rose in volume slightly, and Silas heard a sudden sharp thud from Jeb's cart, as if the man had kicked the wall in his sleep. The keening stopped instantly, cut off as if by a knife. Then from Jeb's court came the whine of his voice, low and venomous, directed not at Silas, but at the floor. "You hush now," Jeb whispered into the darkness. "You hush, or I'll come down there. You know I will. You keep quiet. We got ... company." A choked, whimpering sound came from the cellar, and then silence. A total, absolute silence from below that was more terrifying than the noise. Jebediah knew he was speaking to it. Her. The moan had sounded feminine, high and broken. Silas lay on the cot, his skin crawling, his mind reeling. The implications were monstrous. The brothers, who spoke of preserving the blood and keeping it clean, had someone, a woman, locked in their cellar, chained. The title Silas had been searching for, The Lost Stories of Roanoke, seemed like a child's fairy tale compared to the living, breathing nightmare he had stumbled into. The wood smoke in the cabin suddenly seemed to be the smoke of an altar, the cabin a temple to some dark, familial god. He did not sleep. He lay awake, listening to the rain, the snores of the brothers, and the terrible, echoing silence from beneath the floorboards. He watched the faint, grey light of a false dawn begin to seep through the grimy window, and he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The storm was the least of his worries. He had to see what was in that cellar, and he had to get out. The storm did not break. If anything, the new day brought a colder, more violent wind. The rain had turned to a stinging sleet that rattled against the cabin, making escape an impossibility. Jebediah was the first to rise. He moved with a quiet, snake-like economy, stirring the embers and adding fresh logs until the fire roared, casting a sickly yellow light over the squalid room. He glanced at Silas, who feigned sleep, and then nudged Malachi's massive form with his boot. "Get up, lump. Got chores. Animals won't feed themselves." Malachi groaned, a sound like a bear stirring, and rolled off his cot. The two brothers began their morning routine, a ritual that was both mundane and deeply unsettling. They didn't speak, but moved around each other with a practiced, intimate rhythm, communicating in grunts and head nods. Silas finally woke up, stretching his stiff, damp limbs. "Good morning," he offered, his voice sounding hollow. Jeb grunted in response. He was sharpening the long, skinning knife at the table, the shin-shin-shing of steel on whetstone grating on Silas's nerves. "Storm's worse," Jeb stated, not looking up. "You ain't going nowhere." "I see that," Silas said, trying to keep the tremor from his voice. I hope I'm not imposing. I am grateful for your hospitality." Jeb stopped sharpening and looked up, his pale eyes boring into Silas. "Hospitality, that's a city word. We don't give, we take, we keep. You're here 'cause we let you be here. You're eating our food, breath in our air. That makes you a debt. I told you I can pay. Silver ain't no good here." Jeb interrupted, his voice a low hiss. "Silver's for the valley. Up here, we've got our own accounts." He smiled, that same thin, chilling expression. "But don't you worry, Mr. Vane. We'll find a way for you to pay your due. Soon enough." Silas's blood ran cold. This was not a negotiation. It was a threat. Jebediah was the brain, the spider at the center of this filthy web. He was a man warped by isolation and a poisonous ideology of blood. He saw the outside world not just as foreign, but as a contagion. I understand," Silas stammered. I'll help. What chores need doing?" "I can chop wood, carry water." Jeb laughed, a dry barking sound. "You? Chop wood? You'd likely take your own foot off, city man. Your hands are soft. Like a woman's." He gestured to Malachi, who was stirring a bubbling pot of noxious-smelling porridge over the fire. "Malachi does the heavy work. He's simple, but he's strong. Strong blood. My blood." The pride in his voice was possessive, absolute. He didn't see Malachi as a brother, Silas realized. He saw him as a tool, an asset, an extension of himself. "You just sit," Jeb commanded, returning to his knife. "Sit and keep your soft hands to yourself. And don't you go poking round. Curiosity, that's a sickness. We don't like sickness here. We cut it out." He emphasized the last words by testing the knife's blade on his thumb, drawing a small bead of blood, which he looked at with detached interest before wiping it on his trousers. Silas retreated to the stall. He was a prisoner. The storm was his jailer, but Jebediah was his warden. He watched the elder brother, noting the way his eyes constantly flickered to the trapdoor. He was guarding it. Jebediah was the mind. He was the fanatic, the keeper of the family legacy. Malachi was the muscle, simple and brutal. And the person in the cellar, ... Who was she? A horrifying thought, born of Jeb's talk of blood and lineage, began to form in Silas's mind. The cabin, the isolation, the two brothers, the chained woman. The title he'd seen on a sensationalist pamphlet back in Richmond flashed in his memory. A story he'd dismissed as gutter press fantasy. Now it felt like a prophecy. He had to get a look in that cellar. His survival, he was beginning to realize, depended entirely on understanding the full, monstrous truth of Black Rock Hollow. While Jeb was the clear patriarch, Malachi was the cabin's brute force. He was, Silas observed, less a man than a collection of simple, powerful urges. He ate with his hands, tearing at a hunk of bread and stuffing it into his mouth. He moved with a heavy, flat-footed tread that shook the floorboards, and he hummed. It was a constant, tuneless, two-note drone that vibrated deep in his chest. It was the only sound he made without prompting, and it was infinitely more disturbing than the storm. After the morning meal, the same grey, lumpy porridge, Jeb pulled on a heavy, waterproof slicker. "I'm checking the traps. The creek's likely flooded. Malachi, you watch him." Jeb pointed the skinning knife at Silas. "He don't leave the cabin. He don't touch nothing, especially not the door. You understand me?" Malachi, who had been staring intently at a water stain on the wall, nodded vigorously. "I watch him, Jeb. I watch him good. See that you do." Jeb gave Silas one last, venomous look, and then plunged out into the sleet, slamming the heavy door behind him. The cabin was suddenly terribly silent, save for the storm and Malachi's low hum. Silas was alone with the simple one. This was his chance. "That's a terrible storm, Malachi," Silas began, his voice overly friendly. Malachi didn't look at him. He was seated on the floor, meticulously picking bits of gristle from between his teeth. "Jeb says it's a cleaning. Washes the valley filth off the mountain. Jeb seems to know a lot." "Jeb's the smart one," Malachi agreed, his voice full of simple reverence. "He reads. Grandpappy taught him the rules." "What rules are those?" Silas asked, keeping his tone light. "The rules of the blood," Malachi said, as if it were obvious. "Keep it in, keep it strong. Don't let no one spoil it." He looked at Silas then, his pale eyes wide and oddly innocent. "Your blood is ... thin, spoiled, like river water." "I see," Silas said, swallowing. "And ... and you two, you've always lived here, just you and Jeb?" Malachi's face clouded over. The humming stopped. He seemed confused, as if grappling with a thought too complex for his mind. "No ... before there was ... her." Silas's heart hammered. "Ma," Malachi whispered. The word was a secret. He looked nervously at the door, as if Jeb might hear him through the storm. "Your mother," Silas said softly. "Is she? Did she pass on?" Malachi's expression became one of profound, childlike sadness. "She got ... sick. She got the sickness." "What sickness?" The leaven sickness," Malachi said, his voice dropping further. She tried to take me, down to the valley, to the ... filth." He shuddered, a full-body tremor. Jeb smart, he saved her," Silas repeated, his throat tightening. "Yes, he keeps her safe now. Down where she can't get the sickness again. Where the air is safe." Silas looked with dawning, sickening comprehension at the trap door. "Down ... there?" Malachi's face split into a wide, gap-toothed grin. It was a grin of pride. "Jeb's smart. He fixed her, so she can't never leave us. Never. She's family." The humming started again, louder this time. Not. Malachi had just confirmed it. The scrape, clink, . The human moan. It was their mother, chained in the cellar, saved by her own son from the sickness of wanting to live. Silas felt a wave of nausea so strong he had to grip the stool. The squalor, the isolation, the talk of blood, ... It all snapped into a horrifying, cohesive picture. Does she get lonely?" Silas asked, his voice barely a whisper. Malachi's grin faded. He looked puzzled. "Lonely? She ain't lonely. A pet? Before Malachi could answer, the cabin door crashed open. We freed her, revealing Jebediah, and she's got her pet. His face a mask of thunder. "What you two gabbing about?" Jeb roared, his eyes flicking between Silas and his brother. "What did I tell you, Malachi? What did I tell you?" Malachi flinched, cowering like a beaten dog. "Nothin', Jeb. We was talking about the rain. I didn't say nothin'." Jeb stalked into the room, his eyes promising violence. He backhanded Malachi across the face, a crack that echoed in the small room. "Shut your mouth, you simple-headed fool. You don't talk to it." He then turned to Silas, his hand raised. Silas flinched back, but Jeb didn't strike him. He slowly lowered his hand, a new, terrible calculation in his eyes. "So," Jeb hissed, "the city man knows our business. Knows our family business. He walked over to the trapdoor and kicked it. That what you was asking about, huh? Silas couldn't speak. He just nodded, his body rigid with fear. Jeb's smile was the worst thing Silas had ever seen. Well, seems to me, Mr. Vane, ... Maybe it's time you were properly introduced. Jebediah's words hung in the air, thick and menacing. He stared at Silas, seeming to enjoy the profound, undisguised terror on the city man's face. Malachi whimpered in the corner, holding his cheek, his eyes wide with fear of his brother. A folklorist, Jeb mused, circling Silas like a starved wolf. You like stories, don't you? Well, we got a story here. A real old one. A family story. He strode to the wall and took a large, rusted, iron key from a hook. You're so curious. Let's satisfy that curiosity. This was it. Silas's bluff was called. He had pushed too far, and now the fragile truce was broken. No, please, Silas said, standing up, his hands raised. I mean no disrespect. It's not my business. I don't want to see. I just want to wait out the storm. It is your business now. Jeb snapped. You've stuck your soft nose in it. Now you get to smell it. Malachi, get him. Malachi, ever obedient to Jeb's command, lumbered forward, his previous fear replaced by a simple-minded focus. He grabbed Silas's arm in a grip like a blacksmith's vice. Silas struggled, but it was useless. Malachi's strength was inhuman. He dragged Silas across the dirt floor, his boots scattering the filth. Jeb, don't do this, Silas pleaded, his voice high with panic. Oh, I'm gonna, Jeb said, his voice laced with a sick excitement. He knelt by the trapdoor, a thick, heavy plank of oak bound with iron. Set into the wood was a massive, ancient-looking padlock. The smell that rose from the cracks around the door was overpowering. It was the smell Silas had first noted, decay, waste, a profound, sour mustiness, but 100 times stronger. It was the smell of a cage, the smell of a life lived in darkness. Jabe inserted the key. The lock protested, the metal grinding, but sprang open with a loud clack. She ain't been feeling well, Jeb said, his tone shifting to one of mock concern. She gets ... agitated, especially round new folk. But I'm sure she'll be real happy to meet a city man. He put his hand on the iron ring that served as a handle. Malachi, hold him firm. Malachi grunted, his fingers digging painfully into Silas's bicep. Silas was trembling, his mind screaming. He was about to see the source of the chain, the truth of the hollow. He was about to see the mother they kept safe. Jeb took a deep breath, as if savoring the moment, and with a grunt of effort, heaved the heavy trap door open. A wave of cold, foul air, denser and more sickening than anything in the cabin, washed over them. It was a physical blow. Silas gagged, his stomach heaving. From the black square hole in the floor, a sound emerged. The scrape ... clink he had heard in the night, but louder now, more frantic, and with it, a low, wet hissing, like a cornered animal. Ma, Jeb called down, his voice laced with a cruel, cooing tone. Ma, you got company. A real gentleman from Richmond. A shriek, high-pitched and full of madness, echoed up from the darkness. It was a sound stripped of all humanity, a raw nerve of pure, undiluted rage. She's shy, Jeb chuckled. He grabbed the lantern from the table. Let's go down. You're the guest. You go first. Malachi shoved Silas toward the hole. Below, there was only blackness, and the sound of the clinking chain, and the frantic hissing, "No." Silas roared, finding his voice. He planted his feet, pushing back against Malachi's bulk with all his strength. "No, you can't." His resistance surprised Malachi. For a second, the giant's grip loosened. Silas seized the opportunity. He wasn't a fighter, but he was desperate. He jammed his elbow backward, connecting hard with Malachi's ribs. The giant roared in pain and surprise, stumbling back. In that 1 second of freedom, Silas didn't run for the door. He ran for the hearth. He grabbed the heavy, iron fireplace poker, its end still glowing faintly red from the embers. He spun around, leveling it at the two brothers. "Stay back," he yelled, his voice cracking. "Stay away from me." Jeb's face, illuminated by the lantern in his hand and the open cellar door, was a mask of pure fury. Malachi, clutching his side, looked at his brother, awaiting a command. "A rat," Jeb hissed, his lips curling back from his yellowed teeth. "A cornered city rat. You think that little stick's gonna save you? You think you're the first?" He set the lantern down by the cellar hole and picked up his skinning knife. "You made your choice, Mr. Vane," Jeb said, advancing slowly. "You were a debt. Now, your meat." The standoff was a mockery. Silas held the poker, his knuckles white, his arms trembling from fear and exertion. The glowing tip was a pathetic defense against the two men. Jeb stalked forward with the knife, his movements fluid and confident. Malachi, recovering from the blow, moved to flank him, his massive hands balled into fists. The open cellar hole gaped between them, a black mouth breathing cold, foul air. From it, the frantic clinking and hissing continued. The inhabitant below was agitated, spurred on by the conflict above. "You don't want to do this, Jeb," Silas tried, backing away toward the wall. "Let me go. I'll walk out, into the storm. I'll die out there if that's what you want, but I'll be gone. I'll never speak of this." "That's where you're wrong," Jeb said, his voice calm. "You will speak of this. You'll speak of it, to her." He lunged. Silas was not a woodsman, but he was faster than Jeb. He swung the poker in a wide arc. Jeb ducked under it easily, the metal whooshing through the air where his head had been. But the swing had been a feint. Silas's real target was the table. He brought the poker crashing down on the pewter plates, scattering the rancid leftovers. His aim was the lantern. He struck it hard. The lantern exploded. Kerosene flashed, and for a second the room was lit by a brilliant, blinding orange. A sheet of flame raced across the table and lapped at the nearby wall, igniting the dried herbs and roots hanging from the rafters. "Fire!" Malachi shrieked, his voice cracking with terror. He stumbled back, swatting at the flames that had caught on his overalls. Jeb roared in fury. The sudden inferno had cut him off from Silas. "You fool, you godless fool. You'll burn the house down." The cabin, built of dry, ancient timber and chinked with straw, was a tinderbox. The flames spread with terrifying speed, smoke instantly filling the single room. This was Silas's only chance. He bolted for the door. He fumbled with the wooden latch, his hands shaking, his lungs already burning from the thick, acrid smoke. He could hear Jeb cursing, shouting at Malachi to get the water. But their panic was his salvation. He ripped the door open and tumbled out onto the sagging porch, into the freezing, sleet-filled air. He didn't stop. He scrambled off the porch and just ran, plunging into the woods, into the fog and the storm. Adrenaline giving him a strength he didn't know he possessed. He ran without direction, fueled by pure terror. He could hear, even over the storm, the enraged screams of Jebediah. He ran, slipping in the mud, crashing through brambles that tore at his clothes and face. He didn't care. He just had to get away. Behind him, an angry orange glow began to bloom against the grey sky. The black rock hollow cabin was burning. But as he ran, a new, terrible thought stopped him cold. He leaned against a tree, gasping for breath, the smoke and sleet in his lungs. The cabin was burning. And the woman, the mother, was still chained in the cellar. He had just condemned her to a horrific death. The trap door, the only exit, was in the center of the inferno. He looked back. The glow was bright, casting long dancing shadows through the trees. He could hear the roar of the fire now, and the panicked, animal-like screams of Malachi. Silas was a man of logic, a man of letters. He was a survivor. The logical thing to do was to keep running, to save himself, to put this nightmare behind him. But the sound of that moan, the scrape clink of the chain, echoed in his head. He saw, in his mind's eye, a human being, chained in the dark, watching the fire consume the ceiling above her. "Damn it," he whispered, his voice choking on a sob of rage and fear. Damn it all, he couldn't leave her. His academic curiosity had turned into a terrible, moral responsibility. He turned back. He grabbed a thick, fallen branch to use as a club, and began to creep back toward the inferno, his heart pounding a death drum against his ribs. He had to go back. He had to try. The scene he returned to was one of utter chaos. The cabin was a roaring column of fire. The roof had begun to collapse inward, sending a volcano of sparks and burning embers into the sleet. The heat was so intense it drove him back, searing his face. Malachi was on his knees in the mud, swatting at the flames on his clothes and sobbing, deep, gasping, childlike sobs. He was staring at the fire, mesmerized by the destruction of his world. Jeb, it's burning. The house is burning. Jebediah was a figure of demonic fury. He was trying to beat back the flames at the doorway with a wet burlap sack, a futile, insane gesture. The line, he was screaming, his voice cracking. The legacy. It's all turning to ash. Silas realized, with a shock, that Jeb wasn't trying to save the woman. He was trying to save the cabin, the physical monument to his grandpappy's poisonous creed. The woman in the cellar was secondary to the structure that kept the blood clean. "Jeb," Silas shouted, stepping from the trees. Jeb spun around. His face was blackened with soot, his hair singed. When he saw Silas, his expression of grief twisted into one of pure, homicidal rage. "You!" he shrieked. "You did this! You filth! You burned it! You spoiled it all!" Jeb dropped the sack and charged, his skinning knife still in his hand. Silas had no time to think. He gripped his club and swung. Jeb, blinded by rage, ran directly into it. The branch connected with the side of Jeb's head with a sickening, wet thud. Jeb's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed like a puppet whose strings had been cut, falling face first into the mud, unconscious or worse. Malachi, seeing his brother fall, let out a howl of grief. "Jeb, you hit Jeb." He surged to his feet and charged at Silas. This was not a cunning attack. It was a blind rush of a 250-pound man-child. Silas tried to raise the club again, but Malachi was too fast. He smashed into Silas, sending both of them tumbling hard onto the muddy ground. Malachi's hands, strong as steel bands, found Silas's throat. Job. "Jeb," Malachi grunted, his face inches from Silas's, spit and tears running down his cheeks. House. Silas couldn't breathe. Black spots danced in his vision. He clawed at Malachi's wrists, but it was like trying to bend iron. He was dying. He was being extinguished in the mud, while the woman in the cellar burned. Silas choked out, his last-ditch, desperate gamble. Malachi's rage. He froze. His grip loosened slightly. He looked from Silas to the raging inferno. "Ma," he whispered, his face dissolving in confusion. "Margie. Ma's safe. Jeb. Jeb keeps her safe. Double. Quotes, she's in the cellar. The fire. J. Silas she's gasped, burning. Malachi in a desperate breath as Jeb the pressure eased. Malachi's head swiveled from the fire to his fallen brother, then back to the fire. The simple, brutal architecture of his world was collapsing. Jeb, the smart one, the one who fixed her, had let her burn. "No. Malachi whimpered. "No. Mal. He scrambled off Silas and began to crawl, like a great, wounded bear, toward the burning cabin. "Ma? Ma?" He Silas, watched in horror as Malachi, driven by some broken, vestigial love, clawed his way onto the burning porch. "Malachi, no! It's too late," Silas yelled. But Malachi didn't listen. He reached the flaming doorway, a solid wall of fire, and screamed his mother's name one last time before a section of the roof collapsed, burying the entrance and Malachi in a shower of fire and sparks. Silas stood frozen, the sleet hissing as it struck the inferno. Both brothers were gone, one by a blow to the head, the other consumed by the fire he was trying to enter. The hollow was silent, save for the roar of the flames and the hiss of the storm. And then Silas heard it again. Clink, 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 frantic, terrified, from beneath the burning wreckage. She was still alive. The trapdoor was in the center of the cabin. The main entrance was blocked by the collapsed roof. There was no way in. Silas ran around the side of the burning structure, his mind racing. A root cellar. There had to be another way in, an external entrance. Farmers didn't build cellars with only an internal access. It was impractical. He scanned the foundation, a low wall of stacked fieldstone. And there, on the side of the cabin least touched by the fire, he saw it. A low, sloping bulkhead, two diagonal doors of weathered gray wood set against the foundation, covered in years of leaves and debris. He clawed at the doors, which were half-rotted and swollen with damp. They were barred from the outside by a thick piece of timber dropped into iron brackets. They hadn't used this entrance in years. He threw his shoulder against the bar. It didn't budge. He looked around wildly, his eyes falling on the fireplace poker he dropped near Jeb's body. He ran, grabbed it, and used it as a lever. The wood groaned. The iron brackets were old, rusted. He put all his weight on the poker. With a splintering crack, the timber bar snapped. He tore the rotted doors open. A blast of a cold, indescribably foul air hit him. It was the smell from the trapdoor, concentrated to a poisonous potency. Below him was a set of steep, crumbling stone steps leading down into absolute blackness. The clinking sound was louder now, a frantic, desperate rhythm. "Hello," Silas called down, his voice trembling. "I'm here to help you." A low, guttural growl was his only answer. He had no light. The lantern was destroyed. The cabin fire cast light away from the hole, not into it. He looked at the fire and had a desperate idea. He grabbed a piece of the porch that had broken off and was smoldering on the ground, blowing on the embers until it caught a small, sputtering flame. A primitive torch. He held the torch over the hole. "I'm coming down." He descended the steps, his feet slipping on the damp, algae-covered stone. The cellar was small, not much more than 10 feet square, with a low, oppressively close ceiling of massive log beams, the floor of the cabin above. And those beams were now smoldering. The floor of the cellar was packed earth, but it was not earth. It was a lifetime of compressed filth. In the far corner, huddled as far away from the steps as she could get, was a shape. It was a woman, or it had been. She was skeletal, wrapped in rags that seemed to have fused with her skin. Her hair was a solid, matted grey mass that hung to the floor. She was on all fours, her back to him, her head bowed, and from her ankle a heavy, rusted, iron chain ran to a thick iron ring set into the stone foundation. "Man," Silas whispered. He took a step. The woman spun around, hissing, and the torchlight fell upon her face. It was a vision from a nightmare. Her skin was the color of old parchment, stretched taut over a skull. Her eyes were huge, pale, and utterly feral, the pupils tiny in the sudden light. Her lips were gone, pulled back from teeth that were yellowed and broken. She was not a person. She was a thing kept in the dark for decades. This was Ilara, the mother, the legacy. "I'm not them," Silas said, his voice breaking. "I'm here to help. The fire. We have to go." She just stared, her head cocked, the hissing sound vibrating in her chest. She didn't understand his words. They were just noise. He took another step. She lunged, her hands grasping, her nails like animal claws. She lunged as far as the chain would allow, the shackle biting into her ankle. She snapped at the air, a terrifying chomping sound. "Ilara," Silas said, using the name he assumed was hers. "Ilara, I'm a friend." She froze. The sound of her name seemed to penetrate the madness. Her head tilted, the hissing softened. He looked at the chain. It was thick, but the padlock holding it to the shackle was ancient, rusted, solid. "We have to break it," he said, more to himself than to her. He looked around the cellar. It was a bare, cold hell. A bucket in the corner, a pile of rancid straw. This was her world. A heavy, smoldering piece of the floor above them cracked and fell, landing near the steps, showering the cellar in sparks. The woman shrieked and scrambled back, pulling the chain taut. They had seconds. Silas looked at the padlock. The poker was useless. He had no key. He looked at the iron ring set in the foundation. It was held in place by mortar, but the stone around it was old, fractured. He raised the heavy iron poker. "Stay back," he yelled. He jammed the tip of the poker into the crack between the stone and the ring and put his entire weight on it. The stone groaned. He struck it again and again, using the poker like a hammer and a chisel. The mortar was crumbling, weakened by decades of damp. Ilara watched, her wild eyes fixed on him, her breath coming in short, harsh gasps. Above them, the roar of the fire was deafening. The cellar was filling with smoke. With a final, desperate heave, the stone block tore free from the wall. The chain was loose. She was free from the wall, but not the shackle. "Come on," Silas yelled, grabbing her arm. Her skin was cold, clammy. She shrieked at his touch, pulling back. "We have to go. Fire," he shouted, pointing at the burning ceiling. She understood that. She looked up at the fire, and a new, terrible understanding dawned in her eyes. He didn't wait. He grabbed the heavy chain itself and pulled, dragging her bodily toward the steps. She fought him, clawed at him, but she was weak from starvation. He was stronger. He half carried, half dragged her up the crumbling stone steps, out of the suffocating darkness, and into the grey, sleet-filled dawn. They collapsed in the mud, 30 yards from the inferno, gulping the cold, wet air. The cabin was now a skeleton of fire, the chimney a lone black spire against the orange glow. Silas's lungs burned. His entire body ached. His hands were raw and bleeding. Beside him, the woman, Alara, lay curled in a fetal position, her body racked with tremors. The chain, still attached to her ankle, and the heavy foundation stone, lay in the mud beside her. She was terrified of the open space, of the cold rain on her skin. She kept trying to cover her head, to burrow into the earth, whimpering like a beaten animal. "It's okay," Silas panted, though he knew the words were meaningless. "It's over. You're safe." He looked back at the fire. Jeb's body was a dark shape, near the edge of the heat, unmoving. Malachi was gone, consumed. The cabin, the hollow, the legacy of the brothers, was being erased from the earth. He had to get them out of here. He was injured, exhausted, and hopelessly lost. And he was now the custodian of a human being who had been driven to madness, who hadn't seen the sun in what looked like decades. "We have to move," he said, touching her shoulder. She flinched violently and hissed, her eyes rolling in their sockets. She could not walk. She likely did not remember how to walk. Silas looked at the chain. He couldn't carry her, and the 30-pound stone block. He had to get the shackle off. He went back to Jeb's body. He felt a wave of revulsion, but he had no choice. He frisked the man's pockets. He found the long skinning knife, and in a small leather pouch, a ring of keys. Among them was a smaller, more intricate key. It had to be for the shackle. He returned to Alara. "I'm going to take this off," he said slowly, showing her the key. This metal, I'm taking it off." She watched him, her breathing ragged. He knelt by her ankle. It was a raw, scarred mess, the iron having been on her for so long her skin had grown around it. He gently, carefully, inserted the key into the padlock. It was stiff with rust, but it turned. The lock sprung open. He worked the heavy shackle out of the raw flesh. She didn't scream, just let out a long, low moan as the pressure was released. He pulled the heavy chain and shackle away and threw it as far as he could. It landed in the mud with a wet thud. Alara slowly, hesitantly touched her ankle. She looked at her leg, then at Silas. Her expression was unreadable. It was not gratitude. It was confusion. A profound, world-altering confusion. "We must go," Silas said, standing. He was so weak he swayed. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only bone-deep exhaustion and pain. He pulled his torn, damp coat off and wrapped it around her skeletal shoulders. It was a meager offering against the cold, but it was all he had. "Can you stand?" he asked. She looked at her legs, as if they were foreign objects. Slowly, using her arms, she pushed herself into a sitting position. Then, with a groan that seemed to come from her very soul, she tried to get to her feet. She collapsed. He would have to carry her. He bent down, sliding one arm under her back and the other under her knees. She was terrifyingly light. She weighed no more than a child. She stiffened at the contact but did not fight him. She was too weak. Silas Vane, the folklorist from Richmond, stood up, the broken mother of Black Rock Hollow in his arms. He turned his back on the burning cabin and the bodies of her sons. He remembered his compass. It was still in his pocket. He pulled it out. The needle was steady now, the storm's electrical charge having passed. He found north. Windy Gap was southwest. He had to go uphill, out of this cursed hollow, and then south. He began to walk, one agonizing step at a time, into the fog and the trees, carrying the only surviving piece of the brothers' dark legacy. He didn't get far. Perhaps 100 yards up the slick, muddy incline, his legs gave out. He was carrying a human being. He was wounded, and he hadn't slept. He stumbled, catching himself before he could fall, and gently set Ilara down at the base of a large stone overhang, a shallow cave that offered some small protection from the sleet. She immediately curled up, hiding her face, her body shaking. Just ... just for a minute, Silas panted, leaning against the rock. Just ... catch my breath. He was in a desperate situation. He couldn't carry her all the way to Windy Gap. It was miles. They would both perish from exposure. He needed help. Or he needed to rest. His eyes scanned the area. He was slightly above the hollow now, looking down on the smoldering ruin. And he saw something he'd missed before, tucked into a grove of hemlocks behind where the cabin had stood. A smaller structure. A shed. It was untouched by the fire. It could mean shelter. It could mean tools. It could mean food. "Wait here," he said to Ilara. She didn't respond. He left her in the small cave and slid back down the incline, his heart pounding anew. What if there was more? What if the legacy was bigger than the cabin? He approached the shed cautiously. It was as derelict as the cabin had been, its door hanging off one hinge. He pushed it open. The smell that hit him was familiar. Wet fur, waste, and fear. It was not a tool shed. It was a crude kennel. Lining the walls were cages, not dog kennels. They were cages made of rough-hewn wood and bent chicken wire. And they were full. Raccoons, opossums, several large, terrified rabbits, and in a larger cage, a fox with a broken leg. They were all wild animals, trapped and kept alive. "Malachi's pets," Silas whispered, remembering the giant's words. She's got her pet. He had assumed Malachi was talking about an animal in the cellar with Ilara, but now he understood. Malachi, in his simple, twisted mind, saw no difference. The animals were trapped. His mother was trapped. They were family, they were pets. He looked at the animals. They were starving, their water bowls empty, their eyes wide with terror from the fire and his presence. In the back of the shed, he saw what he was looking for. A workbench. A rusted hatchet, a coil of rope, and a burlap sack half full of feed corn. It was survival. He ignored the animals. He couldn't help them. He grabbed the hatchet, slung the rope over his shoulder, and took the sack of corn. He was about to leave when he saw it, hanging on a peg, a heavy, foul-smelling, but dry oilcloth slicker. Jeb's, or Malachi's. He took that too. He returned to the small cave. Ilara hadn't moved. He draped the heavy, stiff slicker over her. She pulled it tighter, the first sign of rational self-preservation he'd seen. He sat down, his back against the rock, and opened the sack. He took a handful of the hard, dry feed corn and began to chew, the raw kernels cracking between his teeth. It was tasteless, but it was energy. He looked at the woman beside him. He wasn't Silas Vane, folklorist, anymore. He was something else, a survivor, a rescuer. He knew he couldn't carry her. He would have to make a choice. Stay here and wait for the storm to break, or leave her and go for help. Leaving her was a death sentence. Staying could be one for both of them. He chewed the corn, the sound loud in the quiet of the hollow. Ilara's shivering subsided slightly under the heavy slicker. He would wait. He would wait until she had the strength to walk, or until he had the strength to carry her. He would not leave her. He looked down at his hands, caked in mud, blood, and soot. He had killed a man. He had watched another die. He had descended into hell and brought back a ghost. The academic from Richmond was gone, burned away with the cabin. They stayed in the shallow cave for hours. The sleet turned back to a cold, steady rain. The world was a watercolor of gray and brown. Silas ate more corn, his body slowly, painfully processing the meager fuel. He doled out some to Alara, placing it in her hand. She looked at the kernels, then at him. Her movements were bird-like, jerky. She put one kernel in her mouth and chewed, slowly, then another. They sat in silence, listening to the rain and the last dying hisses of the fire below. Silas's mind, no longer clouded by immediate panic, began to work. He had to have a story. He couldn't walk into Windy Gap carrying a non-verbal feral woman and claim he'd just found her. And he couldn't tell the truth, not the whole truth. Who would believe him? They would call him a madman, or worse, the murderer he technically was. Jeb's legacy, the brothers, the chain. It was too monstrous. It was ... folklore, the very thing he'd come to find. He had to create a narrative, a survivable narrative. Fire, he said, speaking as much to himself as to her. We were in a fire. Alara looked up at the word fire. She understood that word. My cabin, Silas said, testing the lie. I'm a trapper. My cabin ... burn. I rescued you. You are my wife. You are ... sick. The smoke, it took your voice. It was a flimsy, pathetic story, but it was a story. It was better than the truth. He looked at her. Alara, he said. It was a beautiful name. It didn't fit her. She just stared at something simple. Her pale eyes unblinking. Your name is Mary. Mary, he repeated. I am Silas. You are Mary. He didn't know if he was helping her or helping himself, building a wall of fiction between the hollow and the world. As the afternoon wore on, the rain lightened. The temperature remained brutally cold. Alara, however, seemed to be drawing a sliver of strength from the corn and the rest. She was no longer trembling. She was watching him. We have to go, he said, standing. His legs felt like wood, but they held him. We have to walk. Can you walk, Mary? He held out his hand. She looked at his hand for a long time. She looked at her own feet, still wrapped in rags. Then, slowly, with an agonizing, creaking effort, she reached out and took his hand. Her grip was weak, but it was human. He pulled her to her feet. She swayed, her legs buckling. He put his arm around her waist, taking her weight. She was light, but it was still a terrible burden. One step, he said. Just one. She leaned on him, her head bowed, and took one shuffling step, then another. They began to move, a grotesque, two-headed creature, lurching through the mud, away from the hollow. Silas used the hatchet to cut a walking stick, which helped him brace against her weight. It was slow, agonizing. Every 100 yards was a victory. They moved up the ridge, out of the deep cleft in the earth, and onto the high ground. The wind was sharper here, but the fog was thinner. He could see the next ridge, and the one after that. It was miles. We can do this, he lied. We're almost there. They walked for what felt like a day, though it was only hours. As the light began to fail again, as a new, freezing dust settled over the mountains, Silas knew they wouldn't make it. They were going to die of exposure out here on the barren ridge. And then he heard it. A sound that was not the wind, a baying, a dog. A hunting dog. Hello, Silas roared, his voice cracking. Help. Help us. He heard a man's voice, distant. Who's there? Help. My wife. ... My cabin burned. We're hurt. He saw them. 2 men in oilskins, carrying rifles and lanterns. They were hunters from Windy Gap, their dogs sniffing the air. They saw Silas, this wild, soot-covered man, holding up a skeletal woman in a tattered slicker. "My God, Jebediah," one of the hunters said, lowering his rifle. What happened to you?" Silas's blood froze. The hunter stepped closer, his lantern illuminating Silas's face. "Wait, ... You ain't Jeb." "No," Silas stammered. "My name is Silas Vane. The hunter's eyes went to the woman. His face went pale. Lord Almighty. Alara." The hunter knew her. The hunter, an older man named Hiram, reached out a trembling hand, but didn't touch her. "Alara, we thought she was dead. We thought you'd run off. 25 years ago." The younger hunter just stared, his mouth open. "She ... Double quotes, Silas fumbled, his carefully constructed lie shattering. "She was ... They had her, them boys." Hiram's voice was a low, dangerous growl. "Jeb and Malachi? They ... They told everyone she'd run off with a peddler. That she left them." Hiram looked from Ilara's feral face to the direction of the hollow. He saw the faint, dying glow of the fire in the distance. "What did you do, son?" Hiram asked, his eyes hard. "They had her in the cellar," Silas said, the truth pouring out of him now, a frantic, desperate confession. "Chained. For years. I was lost. The storm. They took me in. I heard her. The cabin. It caught fire. I got her out. And the boys?" Hiram asked, his voice flat. They're dead," Silas whispered. "Jeb ... He attacked me. I hit him. Male LACHI ... He ran into the fire." He looked at Ilara. Hiram stared at hiding her face from the lantern light. Heavy moment. He looked at the hatchet in Silas's belt. Then he nodded, a slow, grim acceptance. "Some folks died, some families." "They ain't right," Hiram said, his voice thick with a darkness Silas recognized. "Them boys ... Their blood was bad. Grandpappy was a zealot. Always talkin' about purity. Cursed that whole line. We ... looked away. It's easier in these mountains to look away." He turned to the younger hunter. "Ben, get the mule. We'll take her down. This ain't for the law. This is for the mountain to swallow." Ben nodded, his face pale, and ran off. Hiram took a flask from his pocket and handed it to Silas. "Drink. You look like death." Silas drank. The raw corn liquor burned his throat, but it sent a wave of fire through his frozen limbs. What will happen to her?" Silas asked, looking at Ilara. "She got kin," Hiram said. "Down in the valley. A sister. Haven't spoke in 30 years, not since Ilara married up here. She'll be looked after." He sighed, a heavy, rattling sound. "But she ain't Ilara no more. She's what they made her. She's a creature of the cellar." They waited. Ben returned with a mule. They gently, carefully, lifted Ilara onto its back. She was passive, her fight gone. "And you?" Hiram asked Silas. "What's your story, Mr. Vane?" I got lost," Silas said, his teeth chattering. "I saw a fire. I found her. That's all. I found her in the woods, fleeing a fire." Hiram nodded again. "That's a good story. You stick to that one. The fire, it was a lightning strike. A judgment. Sometimes the mountain cleans its own house." Silas looked at the older hunter, understanding. The community knew. They had always known, or at least suspected, and they had done nothing. His arrival, the fire. It wasn't a tragedy. It was a cleansing. "Let's go," Hiram said, taking the mule's bridle. "Let's get out of this cursed shadow." Silas, leaning on his branch, followed them, leaving Black Rock Hollow and its secrets to the rain and the dark. They arrived in Windy Gap well after midnight, a silent, grim procession. Hiram took Ilara directly to his own cabin, where his wife, a stern, capable woman, took one look at the skeletal figure and, without a word, began to heat water. The sister would be sent for in the morning. Silas was given a room at the small, rough-hewn boarding house. His story of getting lost and seeing a fire accepted with the polite, unquestioning silence of people who knew better than to ask. He slept for 20 hours. When he awoke, the storm had broken. A clean, cold sunlight streamed through the window. His body was a symphony of agony. His hands were bandaged. The boarding house owner's wife must have tended to them while he slept. He bought new clothes from the general store. His city suit was a ruined, muddy rag. He bought a train ticket back to Richmond for the next day. He spent his last day in Windy Gap, walking the muddy track of the main street, a ghost. The townspeople were polite, but distant. They knew. He was the man who had walked out of Black Rock Hollow when the fire had claimed its masters. He was the man who had brought Ilara back from the dead. He was, to them, a kind of judgment, and they were not comfortable in his presence. Before he left, he went to Hiram's cabin. The hunter was on his porch, cleaning his rifle. She's gone, Hiram said, not looking up. Her sister came, took her in a carriage, drove her down to the valley, to a doctor, in Roanoke proper. Will she recover? Silas asked. Hiram stopped cleaning. He looked at Silas, his eyes old and tired. Recover? Son, you can't recover from that. That's not a wound. That's a seasoning. She has been salted and cured in madness for 25 years. They can feed her. They can clothe her. But they can't bring her back. The cellar ... It's inside her now. Silas nodded. He knew it was true. He had seen her eyes. And ... dumber. Silas asked. The brothers. A hunting party went up, Hiram said, his voice flat, to look for ... survivors. Found Jeb's body. The other ... he ain't nowhere. The cabin's a pit of wet ash. The ... The official story is that the boys, in a drunken state, let their fire get away from them. A tragedy. You're the traveler who got lost and found their ill mother who had wandered off in the confusion. And that's the end of it. That's the end of it, Hiram confirmed. The mountain has swallowed the story, Mr. Vane. I suggest you do the same. Silas Vane did. He took the train back to Richmond. He put his notebooks away. He never wrote his paper on the folklore of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The stories he'd heard were too clean, too simple. He lived for another 40 years, becoming a quiet, unremarkable professor of literature. He never married. He was known for being jumpy, for his intense dislike of small, dark rooms, and for an aversion to wood smoke. But sometimes, on cold, rainy nights, his students would say he would just stop in the middle of a lecture, his head tilted as if listening to a sound no one else could hear, a sound from deep beneath the floorboards, a faint, rhythmic scrape, a clink, and he would not speak again for the rest of the night.